Hello, welcome to the Spiritual Regression Show on moretalk.tv. My name is Reena, and I'm the director of Divine Aspect, a therapy practice based in Dorset, UK, focusing on life coaching, regression therapy, life between life therapy, and hypnotherapy. I am here today with one of the pioneers of regression therapy in the modern world, Andy Tomlinson. Andy is the director of the Past Life Regression Academy, training regression therapists in Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and soon in the US. Andy is also the author of 2 books in regression therapy, Healing the Eternal Soul and Exploring the Eternal Soul. We are also joined by Dr. Alan Sanderson today. Dr. Sanderson is a psychiatrist who has worked in the UK National Health Service and used spirit release with many of his clients. He founded the Spirit Release Foundation, the world's first association for spirit release. He now practices privately in the UK. Thank you, Andy and Dr. Sanderson, for coming onto the show.
Thank you, Reena. I'm looking forward to it.
Hello, Reena. I'm looking forward to it too.
So spirit release is a contentious issue, and it makes quite a lot of people feel quite uncomfortable. So maybe what we could do is start by explaining what a spirit attachment is, and are they the same as ghosts?
Okay, well, perhaps if I can just start with that. It's a time when I was a student. I was on a 4-year psychotherapy training, which didn't mention about spirit attachments at all. And I had a client who's Jamaican, came in for past life regression. And she was a very quietly spoken lady. And for some reason, she wasn't really going into the past life. And then all of a sudden, there was this really gruff, deep voice started to talk to me. Well, I was just totally shocked and surprised about what was happening. I didn't really know what to do. So I brought her out and talked to her and said, well, were you aware of what was happening? She said, yes, that was my father. He passed away 2 years ago. My mother was in there as well. You never got round to talking to her. So that was the very first time that I came across this strange thing called spirit attachments, and it set me on a path of really discovering more about them. And what I learned is that, you know, we have a physical body, but we also have an energetic body around us. And at the point of death, this energy body continues, and it contains our consciousness. And normally this energy would go on a journey where it progresses from one life to another, but sometimes for various reasons it becomes earthbound. And when it does, if it stays earthbound in a building, it's referred to as a ghost. And if it attaches itself to people, it's called a spirit attachment. It's a person, but without a physical body.
And Dr. Sanderson, you are a medical doctor. How did you get into the practice of releasing spirit attachments?
Well, I was working as a general psychiatrist in a hospital, Fairfield Hospital in Bedfordshire, and I heard about someone, actually an estate agent, entirely non-medical, who was doing work releasing spirits. So I met with him and asked him to tell me about it, and he'd learned about it he'd read some books by Edith Fiore and William Baldwin. That was in the early 1990s. And so that's how I heard about it. So I said, well, you come along. I'm sure there are a number of my patients here in hospital who could benefit from your work, and we'll see what happens. And they were happy to. I said, well, here's this fellow who uses hypnosis, and it could very well benefit you. Would you like him to see you? So a number of them did. And I remember one in particular who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. a young lad of, I think he was 19 at the time, and he was really unwell, so unwell. He was hearing voices, being bombarded all the time by these voices, and he had to have a special nurse. He'd attempted to kill himself before coming into hospital. He'd attacked one of the nurses while he was there, tried to strangle them, and so he was a great problem. And he came along, and Lance took him into hypnosis, and then Lance's method was to say, well, I'm talking to the voices, or I'm talking to the depression, or I'm talking to the anger, or whatever it was that the patient was complaining of. And so Lance was doing his spiel, saying, I'm talking to the voices, and suddenly my patient opened his eyes and said, they've gone. And that was very satisfactory, a very dramatic ending. They did come back again, but not for a week or two, and then very faintly, and never as bad as they had been. So that impressed me. So I thought I'd better learn hypnosis, which I hadn't used up to that time, and learn how to release spirits. And Lance's method was, well, rather hit or miss, because he'd invite the spirit to come out and sit next to him on an empty chair, and there was no way we could tell if there was anybody there. It wasn't as if there was a ghost sitting there. There was nothing sitting there that I could see. And then he'd chat to the empty chair and say, well, what you don't realize is that you've lost your body and you need to go on into the spirit world proper, into the light, and then everything will be so much better for you. And this certainly helped some people. So I thought, well, I'd better learn about this. And then it was that I read what people had written, what the experts, Edith Fiore, who was a psychologist, and William Baldwin, also a psychologist, what they'd written about it. And Carl Wickland, who was a psychiatrist in the 1920s, and they all spoke to spirits, and the spirits replied through the voice of their client or patient. And so I got trained in that. I went to see William Baldwin in Florida and did his training. And then after that, I started speaking to my patients and taking them into hypnosis and speaking to any presumed spirits. People don't know that they've got spirits. Usually sometimes someone comes along and says, I've got this spirit that's talking to me, or that's causing me a lot of trouble of one sort or another. I can feel it moving in my body or something of this sort. But usually people have no awareness at all that they've got a spirit with them. They may be depressed. They don't have to be hearing voices by any means. Or they may have some other problem. They may have changed their behavior in some respect. And then they're quite unaware of it. But in hypnosis, it can very often be that the spirit will come through, and then, of course, they will change their ideas about it. I found it very exciting to learn that there was a spiritual dimension, because I'd never believed there was. And I had no religious beliefs on which I could build. And so it was really thrilling for me to learn that there were spirits which were affecting my patients, because obviously that was something completely new. Well, you might say actually it was very old, but it was completely new in contemporary psychiatry. And so that's how I started to use it.
Because what I find interesting is that earlier on in civilization, mental health problems were almost always attributed to the presence of spirits as opposed to physiological causes. Now, recently, since the advent of modern medicine, the pendulum has swung the other way, where it's all about physiological or psychological causes and not so much spirit attachment or any form of spirituality. What do both of you think that we can do to help bring about this balance between science and spirituality?
Well, one thing that I've been actively involved with is through a therapy called Regression Therapy, which is about taking people to the source of a problem and resolving it. That it includes spirit releasement as one of the techniques. And around about 15 years ago, I got together with all of the leading schools internationally to create a single standard through voluntary regulation that regression therapists would work to. And this is quite powerful because a number of psychologists and medical doctors are now trained as regression therapists. And of course, they're using spirit releasement as a part of their practice. So that's one step that we're doing to help in that area. I think myself, the main area to get more awareness about spirit releasement is in creating more awareness of how past lives can help heal people. And through the evidence that we have, which is quite vast, where there's literally hundreds of thousands of people who have had the problems resolved with past life therapy and regression work, that once you accept the reality that there's a part of us that can survive between two lives, then that part of us sometimes doesn't go to the light and stays earthbound. It's only just a small step, and it's a lot easier to get the acceptance of that sort of work.
And how about you, Dr. Sanderson? How do you think we can bring about a balance between science and spirituality in this area?
Well, there have been tremendous changes, of course. 250 years ago, it was all exorcism, releasing spirits. And then Mesmer came along and introduced his method of healing, from which hypnosis was developed. But there has been a great change in science, a great deal of knowledge, and this has affected medicine very much. We use scientific principles and are very proud of using scientific principles, but the scientific principles are founded on what can be seen or heard or touched or measured. And measurement is such an important part. And so science, contemporary science, is based on materialism. So where do the emotions, where does the spirit come in here? They've been completely excluded by science. Now, we don't have to go back very far, 100 years, to the development of psychoanalysis. Freud and Jung and others, they were showing a great deal of interest in the subconscious mind, that part of the mind of which the conscious mind is unaware, which is responsible for so much. Now, since then, things have changed. The trouble with working with the subconscious mind, it took a long time. Psychoanalysis took a great time. And then when they discovered some of the drugs, neuroleptic drugs and antidepressants in the 1950s, psychiatrists thought, oh, well, we've discovered something that just proves that everything is biologically based. Well, that's one view of things. It doesn't follow at all that everything is biologically based. However, that's what's taken over psychiatry now, and they've completely forgotten or ignored the subconscious mind, which is still there, affecting all of us and holding some very deep secrets. And we need to get back to working with the subconscious mind. So a study of the subconscious could be brought in if we were again to teach medical students hypnosis. There were two committees which were thought, it was thought they would be influential, both in England and in the United States in the late 1950s, and they both recommended strongly that all medical students should learn hypnosis. Well, this never happened, which is a sad state of affairs. So if hypnosis could only be brought into the medical curriculum, and if people could accept that there is a subconscious mind, which plays an enormously important part in human behavior and in human emotions, then I think things would change considerably. But
so would you say the concept of releasing spirits is very closely linked to accessing the subconscious mind?
Indeed it is, absolutely. And when I learned about spirits, this was very exciting indeed. There clearly was. There were things going on underneath our conscious awareness, and we could only call that the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is pretty complex, actually. There are many different parts. The human spirit has many parts and one can contact them. And of course, there's also what we call the higher self, that part of the soul, which has a continuing connection with the spirit world proper, and which is very wise and well informed about the things which we know so little about, the things which go on inside our own mind. One major problem is that medicine and science believe that consciousness depends entirely on the brain. Once the brain's dead, how can consciousness survive? Well, there have been lots of studies of, should we say, near-death experiences. One of them, where people have been on the point of death. They've thought to be medically dead, and then they came back, and many of them told interesting stories about what they saw. Afterwards, they saw deceased relatives, or they saw spiritual leaders, and they were able perhaps to travel around and see the operation that was being performed on them at the time, or see things in other places. So there's a lot of evidence which medics are not prepared to accept at present, but there's a lot of evidence that brain activity does continue, that things can happen, which we can have an awareness even when the brain is functionally completely inactive.
Oh, interesting. So, Andy, do you also use the process of hypnosis to release spirit attachments? And I also understand that you've included this in your regression training. So, why did you do that?
Okay, well, for the simple reason that it resolves client symptoms very quickly and very powerfully. And following the story that I talked to you before about the Jamaican lady, I went through and studied, read all the relevant books, some of the ones that Dr. Sanderson has talked about, and also went on my own training to be trained to do this work. And that's when I just realized how powerful it is that clients' thoughts, emotional problems, and sometimes even behaviors change. For example, I had a student who cleared a spirit attachment from a client, and she had no desire to smoke after that. And it turned out the spirit attachment had been a smoker and had been influencing her to smoke. But how do I go about the work? Well,
Andy, maybe this is going to be quite interesting, and maybe we can stay tuned for how you go about doing the work, because I find the way you clear spirit attachments very fascinating. So shall we talk about this after the break?
Okay.
All right. So stay tuned and we will find out Andy Tomlinson's way of clearing spirit attachments.
Healing the Eternal Soul is a book sprinkled with case examples that makes it an invaluable resource for those who assist others in achieving contact with their eternal part. It lends hope to those whose lives are stuck or riddled with painful residuals from past lives. More so, it's an incredibly interesting read.
The Past Life Regression Academy teaches hypnosis, past life regression, regression therapy, and life between lives regression internationally. Hundreds of students have been through the Academy training program and are successful practices. This is because of the amazing results they get and the referrals that come from it. For more information, see the Regression Academy website.
Hello, welcome back. Andy was just going to share with us his process of clearing spirit attachments. Andy.
Well, the first thing to do is to establish if the client has a spirit attachment. This can be done with a pendulum. It can be done with what's called an idiomotor response, which means that in hypnosis, the client's subconscious mind communicates through the fingers and gives you the information that you need, or with an energy scan where the therapist will make the intention to look for energy not belonging to the client and scan the energy body. And the therapists are trained where they can feel it and sense where this energy is. So the therapist can use any of those approaches. They can even use kinesiology if they're trained. This is quite important because they can establish, first of all, there's a spirit attachment before they start, and then also right at the end of therapy to establish that it's been completely removed. The next step is to establish if the spirit attachment is loosely in the client's energy field or deep within it. I'll perhaps need to explain what I mean by that. Sometimes if a person is going through a very deep emotional issue or problem, there's a vulnerability that they have, and if a spirit attachment enters at that point in the person's energy system, it tends to go deeply into their energy system and is a little bit more difficult to remove. If the spirit attachment is on the edges of the person's energy field, then they can be quickly removed with the help of spirit guides. There's several very quick and easy methods by making the attempt to take those energies away. The more difficult spirit attachments involve some sort of dialogue. And now it could be that the spirit attachment doesn't particularly want to go. It wants to stay in that body, or it may even think it's in their own body, not realizing that their physical body is dead. So the dialogue occurs by taking the client into trance and then inviting the spirit attachment to talk to the therapist, either as a three-way conversation or actually by speaking through the client's voice box, which is quite an interesting experience for the client because the conscious mind is like an observer listening to what's happening, and the energy speaks through the client. Then the two steps for releasement. The first is to make sure the spirit attachment realizes that they're dead, that they're not in their own body, and they're not wanted in this body. That breaks the hold of the spirit attachment. And the second step is to find out what's needed for it to go to the light, to go on its true journey home. And this can be a variety of things, from meeting loved ones, or perhaps undertaking some sort of activities that were important for it. And the importance of this second step is that when the spirit attachment is ready to leave, it goes on a one-way journey and doesn't return. Because if a spirit attachment is forced out of a person and doesn't really want to go, then it would move into someone else. And it also means by this approach, it can be done in a very loving way, almost treating the spirit attachment as if it's another client, treating it with respect, but with the firmness of ensuring that it goes on that journey. And then once it's been removed, or checking that it's actually completely gone out of the energy system, and then there'll be quite a big energetic effect on the client from losing that energy. So some sort of energy healing needs to take place. And quite often this sort of work involves 5 or 10 minutes for a spirit attachment if it involves talking to it. So the whole therapy can be completed in that half an hour or so.
And if someone can detect a spirit attachment on themselves, can they not release the attachment by themselves? Do they have to go and see someone to release it?
Absolutely not. If it's loosely on the edge of the energy field, just by the intent of asking for a spirit guide to take away, quite often they can be taken away. The difficulty is if they are deep in the energy system and they are reluctant to leave for some reason or another, then that's where they would need to seek a specialist, someone who's been trained in this sort of work, for them to release that energy from the person.
Well, Dr. Sanderson just touched on this briefly earlier, but how can our viewers and listeners know if they have a spirit attachment with them?
Well, very often they don't know.
Right.
In fact, I think we might say usually they don't know. Not many people in England are open to the thought that a spirit might be influencing them. But if people are open to it, then obviously they're more likely to accept it. Occasionally people ask for spirits to join them. I've had students who've asked for spirits to come and help them with their learning process, which is a very dangerous thing to do, because the spirit that came was, in this last case I saw, was quite a dark and dangerous spirit, and this lad had a lot of difficulty with it. But many times people just don't know. What sort of symptoms do they produce? Well, fatigue is a very common one, but they can produce all sorts of symptoms. Depression, a change of behavior of one sort or another, drinking and smoking are sometimes increased by having a spirit present. All sorts of things that might come, which does beg the question, well, how do I know that I haven't got this? I'm feeling a bit tired, or I'm feeling a bit depressed, or whatever. There's no certain way of knowing. If there's a sudden change of behavior and that persists, and there's no obvious reason for it, then that is something that's worth looking into. Of course, then there's the question of how do I get someone who can do the work? And that's not easy, because you can't go to a psychiatrist or a medical doctor in general, because they're closed to the concept of a spiritual dimension.
Well, then what we could do is maybe tell them if they're able to protect themselves from getting a spirit attachment. Would Andy be able to answer that? How can our viewers and listeners protect themselves from this?
Okay, well, a lot of time we are energetically protected by the sheer way in which the body works, but there are certain times where we're more vulnerable, and that's where we need to be a little bit more vigilant and careful. You know, if you have an accident, if we drink to excess, or take drugs, or go to a hospital for an operation, there's certain times when we're much more vulnerable. So it's being a little bit more careful at those times. There are energetic techniques that can be used to help for protection, such as a very simple visualization of a cloak of energy being put around to create energy protection. And if that's done on a daily basis, if people do a meditation, it's quite useful to do that, because our thoughts are incredibly powerful, far more powerful than people realize, and energy follows thought. So by just creating the intent, but what's important is for people not to get too overly fearful about this and spend several hours talking about every archangel to come through and help them. They only need to say it once to make the intent quite clear, and to do it on a regular basis.
Got it. That's very good. What about you, Dr. Sanderson? Have you got any tips on how our viewers and listeners can protect themselves?
Well, I think avoiding dealing with spirits, avoiding asking them to help you, avoiding drinking or taking drugs, avoiding drinking to any form of excess, and avoiding taking non or prohibited drugs. Cannabis and other drugs do open people up very much to spirits coming in. So simple things like that. And Also, people who are very emotional tend to, so certainly if anger opens them up to the spirits coming in.
And there is something I'd just like to add, and that is that one of the reasons that people find it's difficult to know whether they've got a spirit attachment in there is because they may have had that attachment in there for quite a number of years and got used to it and think, well, that's how I am. Once they've been energetically cleaned, once these energies have been removed from their energy system and their energies are quite pure, if a spirit attachment comes in, they'll know about it quite quickly. They'll get a sudden headache, they'll have a sudden awareness that something isn't right, and then they can quickly check. So once people have had almost like an MOT test and a check and cleared themselves, then it's a lot easier to be more vigilant about it, as well as the sort of preventative methods we've been talking about.
Andy, Alan, Dr. Sanderson, I'm going to do that again. Andy, Dr. Sanderson was saying just now that it's a little bit difficult to find someone who can go and help release the spirit attachments. Have you got a database or a place or a website where people can actually go and find therapists, perhaps, your students, who can help with releasing the spirit attachments, should they believe that they have them?
Yeah, well, all the therapists that I train are in an association called the Spiritual Regression Therapy Association, which has a website of www.regressionassociation.com. They can find them there, and I'll pass it over to Alan because I think he has another database that he can refer people to.
There's another database which is known as spiritrelease.org, or rather the Spirit Release Organization. That is www.spiritrelease.org. And that is an organization of spirit release therapists. So one can get help from there. There are lots of people who do spirit release who just don't let the matter be known. It's difficult to find them. There are a lot of people with psychic abilities, not trained in the way that Andy or I were trained, but who have a psychic awareness, and they can help people sometimes from a distance. But it's very difficult because they don't have a regular training. Some of them are excellent. It's so difficult to know where to find the right person, I'm afraid, at this date.
I think the one thing that we could add, though, is if the viewer wants to go to someone who has had comprehensive training, then either of the two websites, they could be quite assured that the person that they would find would be able to be helpful for them. Because it's through associations we create standards, and then through standards it means that people are more likely to get the level of service that they pay for.
Perhaps I can say I have a website, www.alansanderson.co.uk. So that's another place where I'll be happy to help if anyone gets in touch.
Oh, thank you. That's quite a lot of help and support that our viewers can get. What I'd like to go to next is to talk about the different types of spirits. Could someone give us a quick, brief summary of different types of spirits, and maybe after the break we can go into more depth and detail about them? So, Andy, maybe you'd like to take this.
Well, yes, there are quite a number of different sorts, but perhaps just keeping it as simple as possible without getting into too much complexity. There's spirit attachments, which are the consciousness of people that have died, but it hasn't gone to the light, which we've been talking about. There are the very strong thought forms that can be projected to people that are called curses or voodoo or things of that nature. And those would probably be two of the major areas. There are a lot of other sorts of energies that people can encounter, but probably for the purposes of this talk, those would be the two main areas that I think we could focus on.
And how about animal spirits?
I didn't get it. How about
Animal spirits.
animal spirits? Well, they do. There are animal spirits. They're fairly rare in my experience. I certainly remember having one young woman who was working as an assistant on an aircraft, an air steward, I think you'd call her, and she'd been falling asleep a lot. And she came to see me and asked why she was going to sleep such a lot. And so I helped her in hypnosis to see what we could learn. And there was a voice came to me. And no, it wasn't a voice. Now, it's a long time ago, so I'm just trying to get this straight. No, what happened was she said, "Oh, I know, it's Dina." And Dina turned out to be her cat. And the cat had died about 12 months before. And I asked about Dina, and she said, well, Dina was very old and in a semi-somnolent state for many months before dying. So it seemed that Dina had brought her somnolence over to her owner.
Wow. Well,
so
this is very interesting. So stay tuned.
There was no problem.
We will continue this conversation after the break and learn more about Dina.
Have you ever wondered what happens after death? Deep hypnosis opens up the most amazing soul memories of a spirit world that awaits us all. Follow the fascinating journey of 15 ordinary people in the book Exploring the Eternal Soul, who have been regressed beyond a past life into the afterlife.
The Past Life Regression Academy teaches hypnosis, past life regression, regression therapy, and life between lives regression internationally. Hundreds of students have been through the Academy training program and have successful practices. This is because of the amazing results they get and the referrals that come from it. For more information, see the Regression Academy website.
Hello, welcome back. We were just going to find out what happened to Dina. Dr. Alan Sanderson, could you just let us know?
Well, Dina hasn't been in touch with me since that day, but I've no reason to think that she isn't in some suitable place where cats can go when they leave their feline bodies behind. And certainly my patient was very well afterwards and didn't fall asleep anymore. So the session seemed to have benefited her.
Oh, that's very good. One would hope Dina is in cat heaven.
Yes, I sincerely hope so. Unless she's back reincarnating somewhere.
Let's just go on to the other types of spirits. How about demonic or evil spirits? Do they exist? And what do you do if you encounter one of those?
Well, my belief is that they do exist. Although, and of course, the Roman Catholic Church and the Christian Church generally only takes account of demonic spirits. And if there's a human spirit comes through, well, then that's just a demonic spirit in disguise. That seems to me to be a very simplistic way of looking at things. My own belief is that human spirits vastly outnumber the demonic spirits. And there are some human spirits which have been under demonic control for a long time, and they present as demonic spirits. But then if one works with them and points out that they were probably human once and a long time ago, and one works with them, then it turns out that in fact they seem to have been human, and they're able to find their own light inside them and go on into the spirit world of light. But I do believe there are demonic spirits, but they're just rather demonic spirits, completely demonic spirits without any light in them are unusual.
And how do these demonic spirits affect people? Do they affect them more than human spirits? And Andy, we'll just come to you in a second.
Well, not necessarily. Sometimes people have quite a crowd of what appear to be demonic spirits, and they may be interfering in one way or another, making that person have less energy, or interfering with their work so they don't manage to do the work properly or whatever, or interfering with their relationships. But you can't say just when somebody comes to you, oh, that one has a demonic spirit or an earthbound human spirit. You just have to look into it carefully. The great thing is we all have the higher self, the higher part of the soul, which is very, very wise and very knowledgeable. And so we can ask that part of the soul to help in identifying a spirit. And sometimes the spirits are brought in by other parts of the soul. It can be quite a complex situation, and one just needs to be aware of that. But there are very few spirits that cannot be, with the right approach, cannot be helped to move on.
So Dr. Sanderson, in your opinion, the ways and the methods that yourself and Andy have told us about protecting ourselves, can these ways also protect ourselves from the demonic spirits?
Yes, indeed they can.
Okay. And Andy, what are your thoughts and views about evil spirits or demonic spirits?
Well, the word is very emotionally charged. And remember, Hollywood has earned billions through these sort of films which portray attached spirits, creating all sorts of strange behaviors in the people. Because Hollywood are in the emotional business, and the emotion with spirit attachments is fear. What I generally tend to find is things aren't always quite what they appear on the surface. I mean, for example, I had a client that had a spirit attachment, and when I started talking to it, there was a lot of shouting and ranting. And at first thought, one could have said, oh yeah, that must be a demonic. But I just simply said, well, what emotions are you feeling? And all of a sudden the shouting stopped. And all of a sudden crying started. And it turned out to be a young boy who was terrified and was trying to portray this protection to stop from being moved out of the host. So that was hardly demonic, but it could have appeared to be a demonic if someone hadn't have used a very gentle approach to moving this energy on. I mean, it's certainly true that there are some attachments that are difficult to move on. I mean, because spirit attachments are just simply people without a physical body, then when you walk down the high street, most people you meet are just ordinary people. Now, certainly, if you go to a prison, you may find slightly more aggressive, more difficult people to deal with. But then if you use a very gentle, loving approach, it's often a lot easier to use it. So I don't like using the word demonic because I think it's got a slightly Hollywood theme to it. I just simply like to say some spirit attachments are easy to work with. Some you have to just work a little harder. But if you use the right techniques, then they'll go on the way. And that's what the training as a spirit Relesement therapist is about.
How interesting. And you also spoke earlier about curses. Could you tell us more about that, Andy?
Well, I've not done a lot of work with curses, and I was doing some training in Turkey. And at the end of the training, on the very last module, where I teach spirit Relesement, the students kept asking about the Turkish equivalent of voodoo. And it turned out that there's a lot of this in Turkey. It's a very common problem. And they kept saying to me, Andy, can you do a demonstration to show us how to clear that? And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've never done any of this work before. I hope they don't ask me on the last day, on the last workshop. So I said, well, do any of you, two of the students, because they were still insisting on seeing a demonstration, I said, well, do any of you students believe you have any of this energy with you? We'll just call it a voodoo for the purposes of the viewers. And a hand went up, and this was a medical doctor who was on the training, and he went on to explain how they'd been told by several psychics that they had this energy with them. And of course, anything unusual that happened to family members was immediately blamed on this particular problem. So I knew the general idea of how to work with curses, so I went in and did the work. And the basic principle when I work with curses is to follow the energy through from the sender to the person who's actually requested it. And it's possible when you're working at a higher mind level to get into communication with the soul of that person to find out why they sent it, and then request them to remove the voodoo being sent. And through the discussion, it turned out that the sender was an elderly grandmother who had sent this voodoo to a new baby that was a baby girl, and she'd always wanted to have a baby boy, and she'd paid someone to put the voodoo curse, which are just intense energy thoughts, just, if you like, the opposite of prayer, projected into a baby's blanket, and this had been sent to the baby and put on the baby. As I investigated it, it turned out that they'd actually sent the cloth to the wrong baby, and the grandmother was in tears and distress about what had happened. And we very quickly got the request for all of the work to be terminated, and energetically I just removed the energy of the curse, and that brought about an enormous change in the family situation. Everybody felt so much calmer, so much clearer from doing that work. So although I don't encounter it very much in some cultures, in other cultures it happens an awful lot, particularly in some of the Caribbean cultures, in India, in Africa, and as more and more people move around, it is a thing that is becoming more and more common. A curse is like a very simpler version of voodoo.
And how can people protect themselves from these curses?
Well, I think the first thing is if you become aware of what it is that's being projected to you, people can energetically protect themselves. I mean, there was a method we talked about before. They can, by intent, ask for like an energetic mirror to be put between the sender of the curse and voodoo and the client themselves, with the intention to bounce back any negativity to the person that sent it to them. But probably the best way is to find out who it is that sent it to them, and either to get into dialogue with them, either in the physical form or in meditation, ask to connect to the higher self or the soul or that other person, and into a dialogue and say, look, please stop it, and find a way of resolving it. When we open up our mind to the fact that these things are possible, then they work. If we have our mindset that something like that could never work, that people would never try it, but we have such amazing abilities within us. All of us have source within us. We only use a fraction of the most amazing abilities within us, and we're just talking about one or two areas where people can start to tune into that and use it to help themselves.
And And Dr. Sanderson, have you had any experience with black magic, perhaps, or voodoo?
Very little. It's becoming increasingly common in London, where I live, because there are so many from India, Africa, the Arab world, where these things are commonly practiced.
Yeah.
But it is necessary to, and often they're attached to a part of the personality, what we call an ego state. And this ego state may have been convinced that it was subject to a curse, and of course that opens it up to a curse. And so one just has to work with them in whatever way is best. But I think now, in recent last 2 or 3 years, I've been working much more with the higher self. And it's the higher self who has many of the answers that one needs. And so that's what I would do now. If next time I see a patient who's had a curse, I shall work through the higher self. And as Andy said, you can perhaps get in touch with the source of the curse and stop it there.
And how about dark energy, Andy? Because in your book, Transforming the Eternal Soul, you do have a chapter on dark energy. Is dark energy the same as curses, voodoo, black magic?
It can be. It's just simply this is moving away, particularly from spirit attachments, into really highly charged energy that needs rather specialist approaches to work with. I mean, I'll give you an example to illustrate it. There was a person I was working with that had been affected by a shrunken head. They were doing some Reiki healing to a family who was suffering quite a lot of energy problems. And this particular client of mine had discovered that the person whose house she went into had gone to the Amazon and had brought back a shrunken head that had been used by some of the indigenous tribes over many tens of years to project all the negativity of things that were happening. So it was like by intent, they'd been projecting negative energy into it to take it away from the villagers. And they'd brought it back and put it in the garage, and this thing was just generating intense negativity. And it had seriously affected all the family members, and they were suffering from very low energy. The man of the family who had actually brought the shrunken head back had actually started to have cancer. It had affected him that much. And the people were getting in touch with the head were being affected. It was fragments of this energy was getting into their energy field. And there's some techniques that I've developed of vortexing this energy away. So I went through and energetically cleaned remotely, not only the shrunken head, but all the people who'd given the permission for me to clear that energy away. And then I checked using some of the intuitive checks that we mentioned before to make sure that it had gone. And that created a much energetically safer place for that family to live in.
And do you teach these advanced energy ways?
I do, but I don't go out and promote it specifically because people have to use very, very strong energies for that. Normally, it's taught to the graduates who've been through my training for the simple reason that part of the training is to do a lot of personal work and to clear themselves of emotional issues so that when they are tuned in to these very strong energies, they're only ever using them with the right intent. They're not using it for any inappropriate ways of working.
So it's a very responsible way of training people. So thank you so much, Dr. Sanderson and Andy, for coming and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. You are our modern-day Ghostbusters. Can I say that?
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sanderson and Andy, for a fascinating discussion.
It was good to be here.
Thank you, Reena.
That's all the time we have for this show. Thank you, Andy and Dr. Sanderson, for joining us. And thank you everyone for tuning in. For more information on Andy Tomlinson, please go to regressionacademy.com or regressionassociation.com. And for more information about me, please visit divineaspect.com.
Healing the Eternal Soul is a book sprinkled with case examples that makes it an invaluable resource for those who assist others in achieving contact with their eternal part. It lends hope to those whose lives are stuck or riddled with painful residuals from past lives. More so, it's an incredibly interesting read.